What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to be talking about some buys. Now that this free agent cycle has kind of settled a little bit, I think that there's definitely some values in today's trade market. So we are going to be talking about some of those players. Now, some of these players are going to kind of teeter towards a contending team. Now, for most of us, unless you are rebuilding, these buys are going to be applicable. But if you are rebuilding, maybe some of these buys are just not feasible based on your timeline and the age of some of these guys. But with that out of the way, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about some of these buys. All right, so the first buy that I want to talk about today is going to be at the quarterback position. It's going to be Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. Now, Jared is coming off of a 2024 season where he played in 17 games. He had 4,629 passing yards and 37 passing touchdowns. That was good for 19.8 fantasy points per game, which was 7th best in the NFL. Now, Goff is currently ranked quarterback 20 over on Keep Trade Cut. That's a 5-spot decrease from his quarterback 15 overall ranking that he had just 6 months ago. And a lot of the reasoning behind this is because former Detroit Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson has taken a head coaching job for the Chicago Bears and will no longer be calling the plays for the Detroit Lions. Now, under Ben Johnson, Jared Goff was able to put together 3 back-to-back-to-back top 10 fantasy seasons, including 3 straight years with at least 4,400 passing yards and 29 touchdowns. And yes, the loss of Ben Johnson is a concern, but it's hard to argue that Jared Goff is going to see a significant regression with the amount of high-quality weapons he has on this offense and this good of an offensive line. Now, Pro Football Network has the Lions offensive line projected as a top 5 offensive line in 2025, and the Lions, they were excellent against the blitz last year, which allowed Goff to finish top 10 in the NFL in time to throw. Now, because of that, Jared Goff was super efficient. He finished as a top 10 quarterback in passing attempts, passing yards, passing touchdowns, yards per attempt, fantasy points per game, accuracy rating, and true passer rating, which is further proof of the talent of Goff when he's given time and the talent of his receiving core built around Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, and many more. Now, that said, the Lions, they are moving on to a new play caller in John Morton, but Morton has familiarity with this offense after spending time as the Lions' senior offensive assistant in 2022 with Dan Campbell, and he has added to his resume by working with Sean Payton as their passing game coordinator there in Denver. So given the circumstances, I'm not certain that Jared Goff is going to fall off as hard as some people may think he is. And so for me right now, he is a very good value buy, especially if you're just looking for a quarterback 2 to kind of shore up that super flex position in those super flex leagues, especially because I still do believe that Jared Goff is going to flirt with those low-end quarterback 1, high-end quarterback 2 type of numbers for the majority of the 2025 season, given the team that he has built around him and that offensive line in front of him. And if you're looking to buy Jared Goff, I think you can probably go get him for a mid-2025 first-round pick. Now let's move on to my next buy. My next buy is going to be at the wide receiver position. I want to talk about A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. He is currently ranked as the wide receiver 14 on Keep Trade Cut, which is a 6-spot decrease from his wide receiver 8 ranking early last season. Now, Brown is coming off of a 2024 season where he only played in 13 games due to some injuries. He had 67 receptions for 1,079 yards and 7 touchdowns. It wasn't typically the year that we see out of A.J. Brown. Now, this decrease in his overall value to me is somewhat puzzling because I don't think we've seen enough data to scream that he's regressed as a player, and he's still just 27 years old, which doesn't scream old to me either when it comes to Dynasty fantasy football age. So the only other reason that I can think people may be lower on A.J. Brown right now is because they maybe believe that Saquon Barkley is the engine of this offense now in Philadelphia, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but the only other reason might be just the injury dip and name fatigue with A.J. Brown. Now, that said, I do think that A.J. Brown can still be a high-end fantasy football wide receiver, even with Saquon being the first option in this offense. Since moving to Philly in 2022, Brown has consistently given us top 12 finishes in fantasy points per game, despite always getting some additional competition in this offense around him with Davante Smith and now even Saquon Barkley. Now, as I said earlier, I still believe AJ can be a producer with Saquon in this offense, and despite the addition of Saquon last year, Brown still saw a massive 34.4% target share, which was the 2nd best in the NFL, and he still finished 14th in receiving yards while only playing in 13 out of 17 games for the Eagles. I think that shows how big of a role AJ Brown still has in this offense despite the addition of Saquon Barkley, and I think you could even argue that the addition of Saquon is actually opening up some of the receiving game for AJ Brown to make some additional plays, as he also finished 2nd in air yard share at 47% and 2nd in yards per route run. Now, lastly, AJ Brown, he was also #1 in yards per team passing attempt, further proving that when Jalen Hurts and the Eagles are throwing the football, A.J. Brown is almost always certainly the first option, and he's been doing a great job at it, posting a top 5 dominator rating and a top 5 explosive rating in 2024 as well. So like I said, I don't know if it's just name fatigue or maybe people getting a little bit too excited about some of these younger wide receivers in the Dynasty trade market, who quite frankly haven't really put together the fantasy football resumes that A.J. Brown has put together for us up to this point. But what I do know is that there's very few fantasy football wide receivers that have the league winning type of potential that A.J. Brown does when he's healthy in your starting lineups. And so if I could, I'd be buying the dip almost anywhere that I can get it here this offseason. Let's move on to my next buy. It is still going to be at the wide receiver position. It's another old wide receiver. We're going to talk Davante Adams now of the Los Angeles Rams. Now, Davante is coming off of a 2024 season where he played in 14 games. He had 85 receptions for 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. And Davante Adams is certainly a big winner of free agency after landing with the Los Angeles Rams, but he's still seeing a significant value dip over on Keep Trade Cut due to his age, which is putting him around the wide receiver 44. Now, this just doesn't feel super realistic because I can't really fathom there being 44 wide receivers I would rank over Davante Adams right now, even despite his age, especially if I was a contending roster. So this does make him the perfect buy low candidate if you can swing it. And although 2024 was certainly a weird one for Adams, who did start his season with the Raiders before going to reunite with Aaron Rodgers in New York, to both of them being let go and moved on from the Jets just a few months later. But I do think that Adams still proved throughout the year that he was capable of giving you some of these wide receiver 1 spike weeks, even while he was sharing an offense with a young stud in Garrett Wilson. Now, this situation in LA is an upgrade from all of that, and it should allow Adams to finish his career in LA while still being fantasy relevant and giving us solid wide receiver 2 production with those wide receiver 1 spike weeks still in the range of outcomes. And yes, Puka Nacua is still the future of this team, and he's certainly going to be receiving a massive extension from the Rams here very soon, but Adams is the perfect complement to Puka now that Kupp is in Seattle, because Adams can play inside and outside, which was something that Kupp couldn't really do at a high level anymore, which will allow LA to move Puka around and find some easy opportunities for Davante Adams. We've also seen a long history of data showing how Matthew Stafford feeds his wide receivers, and he was doing it a lot last year early on when both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp were healthy, and I would expect him to do the same thing here with Adams and Puka as well. Adams is still one of the NFL's best route runners, and he posted success rates last year in the 80th and 89th percentile against both man and press coverage. So I think it's fairly safe to say that Davante Adams could go out and have another big year or two for your fantasy football teams here while he's spending his time with the Los Angeles Rams. And if you could go grab him for an early 2025 second, which does seem to be somewhat of the asking price for him in markets right now, it's something that I'd be willing to do here in a heartbeat. Let's move on and let's talk about a buy at the running back position, and I want to talk about Najee Harris, who is the new running back for the Los Angeles Chargers. He's another player that I think was a big winner in NFL free agency this year, and somebody I'm certainly willing to buy at his current KTC cost of running back 25. However, I do think that there is certainly some risk with Najee, as Los Angeles could look to bring Dobbins back or even add a rookie running back to compete with Najee, but the upside Najee possesses at his current cost is certainly worth the gamble. Najee has been Mr. Consistency throughout his NFL career, consistently rushing for 1,000 yards year in and year out, and he's never missed a game due to injury, but he's also failed to turn into a high-end fantasy football producer after getting a lot of people excited as a rookie. Now, it's tough to tell how much of it was Najee's fault and how much of it was actually Pittsburgh's fault, who did put a pretty bad offensive line in front of Najee for the majority of his time there with the Steelers, and the most likely reality is it's probably a little bit of both, but the change to Los Angeles could benefit Najee, who will now be running behind 2 bookend tackles in Rashawn Slater and Joe Wall, and in an offensive scheme that saw J.K. Dobbins become fantasy relevant last year with the help of Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. Now, there are certainly some things in Najee's analytical profile that make me a little bit optimistic that a change of scenery could put him back into that consistent RB2 type of production, especially when we're taking a look at some of these efficiency metrics. Najee was a top 12 running back in evaded tackles, breakaway runs, and yards created, also while posting top 5 numbers as a receiver when it came to yards per route run. Not to mention, he did all of this while seeing stacked boxes all year long for the Pittsburgh Steelers at a top 5 rate, and had 50 of his runs stuffed at or behind the line of scrimmage, which also screams to me O-line issues from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, as I mentioned, there's certainly going to be risk with buying Najee Harris, but considering that J.K. Dobbins was able to come into this offense last year off of multiple big injuries and averaged nearly 15 fantasy points per game, in addition to the Chargers looking at Najee Harris as a potential upgrade from what they had last year in J.K. Dobbins, I think you can definitely make an argument that there could be room for growth from Najee Harris. Plus, considering that there's going to be people in your leagues that are likely going to be wanting to move off of him after some disappointing years for maybe a mid-2025 second or any 2026 second, I'd be willing to take the gamble on Najee Harris if you didn't want to take the gamble on the rookie in that range. And now let's go on to my last buy. It's going to be at the tight end position. I think George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers is a great buy candidate at the moment. He's currently being valued as the tight end 6 over on Keep Trade Cut, which doesn't seem egregious to me, but I do believe that he's still being slightly undervalued due to the production that I think he brings to fantasy football teams, especially in those tight end premium formats. With Brandon Ayuk missing so much time last year and Deebo Samuel regressing, Kittle stepped up big time for the Niners and was a beast for fantasy, finishing as the tight end 2 on the back of 1,100 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. And now the reality is that Ayuk will still probably need some time to get back to 100% at the start of the year while he's recovering from that injury, and Deebo Samuel is no longer on the roster, which should mean more of the same for George Kittle here in 2025. At 31 years old, it is a little bit older, and there is a chance that his trade value doesn't increase much anymore, especially as the Niners continue to retool this roster. But Kittle was the #1 tight end last year in fantasy points per game, yards per route run, dominator rating, explosive rating, and fantasy points per route run, while posting top 5 numbers in air yards share, average target distance, receptions, receiving yards, yards after the catch, and total touchdowns, just to name a few. Now, my point here is that Kittle could very well open the year as the Niners' #1 option on offense, and he certainly has the talent and the skill set to produce at a high level, and Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan clearly trust him to make this offense go, and I think he currently can be bought in your trade market for a late first or an early second, depending on your league size, and in that range, nobody should be considered a lock to be a high-end fantasy producer in 2025 from this rookie class. If I'm a championship contender, I'm sending that type of draft capital to go secure George Kittle and lock down my tight end position with an elite fantasy football option, and I'm just going to reap the production that George Kittle gives me there in 2025, even with the understanding that he may not go up in value in trade markets going into next offseason, but knowing that he has the ability to help me go win a championship. And if I don't have the draft capital, or I don't want to use that type of draft capital to go get Kittle, I think he's a clear tier up type of option from guys like Tucker Kraft, who the community is kind of hype about, guys like David Njoku, and maybe some other options where you could tier up and go get George Kittle, who I think is just going to be a much safer, higher end type of producer than those guys that we just mentioned. So there you have it, folks. That is 5 buys that I'm currently looking at in my trade markets now that free agency has kind of settled. If you did enjoy today's video, go ahead and hit that like button for me. Make sure you are subscribed to this channel, trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the NFL draft, and make sure you go join our free Discord. Have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with your Dynasty fantasy football teams 24/7, 365. But with all of that being said and all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today. I will see you on our next episode. But until then, peace out.